All right, let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the fascinating biological mechanics of marijuana. Today, we're looking at something that is part biology lesson and, well, part detective story. We are going to decode the exact biological sequence of events that takes place inside the human brain to produce that very specific sensation of being high.
I want to kick things off with a central question about this plant, because cannabis really isn't new. According to the historical and archaeological records, we humans have been interacting with it for literally thousands of years. We're talking ancient cultivation in Taiwan over 3,000 years ago, Scythian shamans in the 5th century BC inhaling hemp smoke to induce trances, even French soldiers under Napoleon trying hashish in Egypt. We've been chasing this feeling for a really long time. But for most of human history, we had absolutely no idea why a simple plant could alter our perception of time, give us crazy cravings, or just flood us with euphoria. Like, how exactly does a leaf dictate terms to the human brain?
Section 1. The cannabis plant family. To understand the high, we first need to look at the plant itself and its surprisingly complex chemical makeup.
Now get this, what's really fascinating here is that legally and chemically, the distinction between hemp and marijuana all comes down to a single kind of arbitrary threshold. They're both exactly the same species of plant, cannabis, but if the plant contains 0.3% or less of a chemical called THC by dry weight, it's classified as hemp. Hemp is totally non-intoxicating and has historically been used for things like rope, paper, and clothing. But if it crosses that tiny 0.3% line, boom, it's legally classified as marijuana, the psychoactive version. So the whole Magic Act really relies on that specific chemical concentration.
And when we really zoom into the marijuana plant, we meet these two very different molecular brothers that drive the whole experience. Out of over 100 cannabinoids in the plant, THC and CBD are by far the most famous. Think of THC as the rock star. It's loud, it's aggressive, and it's the molecule entirely responsible for that psychoactive high. Then you have CBD, or cannabidiol. CBD is like the sound engineer standing back at the mixing board. It doesn't get you high at all. Instead, its job is to regulate, balance, and calm things down. Structurally, they are almost identical twins, but their personalities inside your body literally couldn't be more different.
Let's track this historical timeline for a second because it shows how it took us thousands of years to finally pinpoint the exact molecules responsible for this experience. While Herodotus was writing about people getting intoxicated from hemp smoke all the way back in the 5th century BC, it actually wasn't until 1964 that an Israeli chemist named Raphael Mechoulam finally isolated the THC molecule. But the real plot twist? The true breakthrough didn't happen until 1988. And it wasn't a discovery about the plant at all. It was a discovery about us.
Section 2, your hidden internal network. Because the most shocking discovery wasn't found in a leaf, but rather deep inside our own bodies. Scientists realized that THC wasn't magically inventing a new pathway in the brain. The absolutely crucial point here is that we humans actually have our own built-in network, specifically designed for molecules exactly like the ones in cannabis. It's called the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS. This is a vast, hidden communication network spanning your brain, your organs, your immune system, the whole shebang. Its entire job is to maintain balance, or what scientists call homeostasis, in your body. It acts as a master regulator for your mood, your pain levels, your appetite, and even your sleep. It's essentially your body's internal volume control knob.
And here is where it gets mind-blowing. Our body naturally produces its own keys for this network. Long before you ever encounter a cannabis plant, your brain is busy manufacturing its own natural versions of THC. The most famous one is called anandamide, taking its name from the Sanskrit word for bliss. It's a really delicate, natural molecule that your body releases on demand to help you relax, forget traumatic memories, or even feel that classic runner's high after a long jog. But anandamide is just a temporary worker. It shows up, does its job super quickly, and is immediately broken down.
To keep this simple, think of your body's network as having two main doors that these molecules unlock, CB1 and CB2 receptors. CB1 is the door to your brain and nervous system. It controls things like emotions, memory, and motor skills. CB2, on the other hand, is the door to your immune system, acting kind of like a security guard that manages inflammation and tissue repair. These two doors are the literal anatomical structures that make it even possible for marijuana to affect us.
Section 3. THC, the master key. All right, now we reach the point where the external plant actually meets our internal biology.
This is where the heist begins.
The massive aha moment here is that THC is just a chemical imposter. It just so happens to be shaped so perfectly that it fits exactly into the locks of our brain's CB1 receptors. When someone consumes marijuana, THC floods straight into the bloodstream and heads right for the brain. It finds those CB1 doors, pulls out its counterfeit key, and completely hijacks the system that our natural anandamide usually controls. But remember how our natural bliss molecule anandamide is like a really gentle, temporary tap on the brakes? Well, THC behaves entirely differently. When THC enters the system, it doesn't just tap the brakes, it's like slamming your foot on the gas pedal and just holding it there. It arrives in massive quantities, it stays in the system for a really long time, and it activates those CB1 receptors globally and forcefully, completely bypassing the body's normal healthy limits. Section 4, unleashing the brain's dopamine. Let's actually look inside the brain's reward center when THC turns that key. How does it physically create that overwhelming feeling of euphoria? So this sequence is a literal biological heist, where THC basically disables the security guards and opens the vault wide open. Normally, you have these inhibitory neurons called GABA that act like those security guards, stopping your brain from releasing too much dopamine all at once. But first, THC aggressively binds to the CB1 receptors. Second, it effectively gags those GABA guards, removing the brain's natural brakes. And finally, with the brakes completely disabled, the brain's dopamine neurons are set free to fire wildly. That sudden flood of dopamine hitting a region called the nucleus accumbens, which is your brain's primary reward center, is the exact mechanical reason you feel that powerful surge of pleasure. Your brain receives this massive, unearned reward signal, generating intense euphoria and recording a deep memory that basically says, wow, whatever we just did, that was highly rewarding, we should definitely do it again. That right there is the core of the high, and honestly, the root of psychological dependence. Section 5, the anatomy of a high. Because beyond just pleasure, THC is interacting with all sorts of different regions of the brain, creating this whole symphony of altered perception. Remember, those CB1 receptors aren't just in the reward center. They are absolutely everywhere. By mapping the CB1 receptors to these different brain regions, we can decode pretty much every single symptom of a traditional high. When THC hits the hippocampus, your short-term memory glitches, which is why you might completely forget a sentence halfway through speaking it. When it hits the hypothalamus, it tricks your brain into thinking you are literally starving, leading to the infamous munchies. In the prefrontal cortex, it alters your perception, making a 5-minute wait for a pizza feel like an hour. And over in the amygdala, your emotion center, a high dose can overstimulate the system and suddenly trigger intense anxiety or paranoia. And this brings us right back to our rock star and sound engineer analogy. This perfectly explains how CBD can actually step in to soften the intense, sometimes anxiety-inducing effects of THC. While THC is busy kicking open all the CB1 doors in the brain, CBD stands back. It doesn't bind directly to those same receptors. Instead, it subtly alters the shape of the locks themselves, making it harder for THC to overstimulate the brain. It actively works to reduce the paranoia and anxiety that the rockstar THC can cause, acting as this absolutely crucial internal buffering system. Section 6. When the system adapts. Now, the human brain is highly adaptable, and it doesn't just sit back and let this chemical heist happen forever. It knows when a system is being artificially flooded. If you constantly flood the system with high doses of THC, the brain actively starts defending itself through a process called downregulation. Essentially, the brain says, okay, it's way too loud in here, and it literally starts removing the CB1 doors, pulling them back inside the cells to quiet the noise. As a direct result, your natural dopamine baseline drops. This is exactly how you build physical tolerance, meaning you start needing more and more of the plant just to feel the exact same baseline effect. This also perfectly explains why chronic use can lead to dependence. If someone who heavily uses marijuana suddenly stops, they're left with a brain that has fewer CB1 receptors and much lower natural dopamine levels. Your body has essentially forgotten how to run its own natural happiness and relaxation network without the plant. This imbalance is exactly what causes withdrawal symptoms like insomnia, irritability, a lack of appetite, and a low mood, at least until the brain's internal network can finally rebuild and reset its own receptors. I want to leave you with this final, kind of profound thought about the delicate balance of our internal chemistry. We've seen today that the high isn't magic. It's a brilliant chemical impersonation that taps into a system we already own. But when we continuously outsource our bliss, our sleep, and our relaxation to an external plant, what happens to our own internal machinery? If marijuana simply hijacks the biological system we already use for natural joy, relaxation, and memory, are we unlocking our brain's potential or just wearing out the keys? Definitely something to think about next time you hear about the science of cannabis. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.